Good morning, class. Today we would talk about the poem Letter to a Prospective Immigrant, composed by Lakshmi Gill. When we talk about South Asian Canadian literature, the first remarkable point that we notice is women have written more poetry and men more prose. Themes chosen by these women are varied and present both political and personal experiences of theirs. They present their own perspective of Canada as well as their motherland. The poems by these immigrant women talk about the realities lived by them as well as by the other expatriates, though every poet is unique in her style and expression. Yet there are some tints of commonality in the presentation of thoughts, theme, and poetic craft. The commonness is also of their growth, the growth of their personal immigrant consciousness into a much larger political consciousness. The issues faced by them as immigrants have become food for their thoughts. The turbulences of their own lives have become universal through their poems. Working in the outside world, these South Asian women encounter racism besides having to deal with patriarchy at home. The patriarchy that they face inside their houses is no less oppressive than the white hostility they face outside their homes. But this outside racism compels them to comply with the idealized concept of Indian culture and values. Though these values and norms act as a social web for them, giving them a reason to mix with their own people, yet sometimes the same cultural norms cage them. These immigrant societies give them a comfort zone and yet simultaneously restrict their flights. They realize the appreciation or disapproval of their works and achievements. There are enforced restrictions on their activities and the gender relations, which are reproduced at times with physical force. The multiculturalism in Canada was considered an attempt to bring women out of this vicious circle of racism and patriarchy. But this did not happen because of the common mindset of blame the victim. Immigrant women remained isolated, and their low socioeconomic condition was a result of their own limiting cultural traditions, lack of skills, and lack of language. Another reason for the plight of immigrant women is lack of information. Letter to a Prospective Immigrant highlights the feelings of the poet towards her host country. It talks about her dislike for the land to which she has migrated. She presents Canada as a cold land, cold in both respects, of being very cold climate and the cold behaviors of the people. Through this letter, she prepares the prospective immigrant for the harsh realities of the new land. She talks about the diasporic experiences of upheavals, dislocations, and eventual shaping of lives in a new country. She is very conscious of both racism and sexism that exist in the new land. These are the two problems which are most talked about by the diasporic writers and poets. Lakshmi Gill's poem is a voice against this racism and sexism. She raises her voice for the other, as they are called by the mainstream people. She is not alone in raising her voice against all these. We have other poets too who have talked about all these issues. Like Lakshmi Gill, Suniti Namjoshi also demands social recognition. But Gill's poetry is different from other poets. She came to Canada as a student, not as an immigrant. Unlike other women who entered Canada as immigrants and had to get immediately preoccupied with settling down and other responsibilities of home, she did not have to face all that. She had a freer atmosphere, as settling meant self-adjustment only. But as an immigrant, she sees the land as a cold country. She wishes to transcend the borders of nationality through her poems, but like any diasporic poet, her original culture seeps through, and we find an ample amount of both Filipino and Indian perspectives in her poems. The poem, Letter to a Prospective Immigrant, is a kind of caution message to prepare the future immigrant for the new hardships. She prepares the prospective immigrant for the cultural shock, the extreme cold atmosphere, the issues of commerce and financial matters, and the pains and pangs of nostalgia. The letter is not there just to warn and frighten the future immigrant, but to make him or her ready for a new life. She says that the cold climate of Canada is not a myth, it is unbearably cold for the people coming from warmer climates. Here, the term cold has a symbolic reference as well. When the Indian immigrants reached Canada, they struggled real hard to adjust with the new environment. That new climate was tough for them. Along with this, the term cold refers to the indifferent and cold behavior of the host country. The immigrants from the subcontinent were marginalized in many ways. They were the racial, religious, and the linguistic other. There was a time when from 1908 to 1947 there was a ban on immigration to Canada, which was slowly and systematically dismantled. However, there was a rise of anti immigrant prejudice in the 1970s and the 80s. The immigrants had to face discrimination and prejudice. The poet asked the supposed immigrant not to come naked but bring enough clothing to safeguard himself or herself. As these natives protect themselves with woolens, they would soon learn to lean forward due to the weight of the heavy coats, just like the native Canadians. She also says that the new immigrant should be ready to compromise with his or her self esteem, as within some years his or her pride would be suppressed too. In the second stanza, she says that one soon learns to adjust. She is concerned with the problems of adjustment which are demanded from a brown wife with a white husband. She is expected to fulfill all the commitments. The greatest challenge of a brown wife lies in her ability to articulate feelings and not cry about imaginary losses. Lakshmi Gill weaves several metaphors into her poems and she uses different symbols. There is an issue about virginity and chastity in South Asian communities. The poet here refers to the widespread perception that the Canadian society is promiscuous. Thus, the South Asian families try to preserve their values and culture. The poet moves forward with a reference to commerce and finance. She says that the immigrants should seal their souls in the brass tower so that the devilish monetary approach to everything does not impact them adversely. She talks symbolically about the story of Bell Tower, which was burnt mysteriously. It also refers to the scriptures, where brass is mentioned as an alloy of copper and zinc, used for armor, musical instruments, and for money too. The next stanza talks about the imaginary happiness that an immigrant carries while coming to a new country. She says that this is not only a land of merry-go-rounds but also of hardships and labor. The people of this country expect too much from the immigrants, so she asks them to come prepared for sacrifice and hard work. She says that the immigrants come here in search of happiness, but migration is not only about getting happiness, but it also brings pains, which are associated with their yearning for the past. She says that this land expects the sacrifice of their self-esteem, their expectations, and their emotions too. She tells the immigrant to come there with blessings from his or her homeland because this place will not care for the hardships, but it will make him or her suffer in many ways. That's all for today's class. Goodbye and have a nice day ahead.